Oh, hey, Cassius, you just caught me reading my Bible. And what am I reading, you may ask me? Well, I was wondering, what is the greatest commandment? We have 10 of them. And so, you know, which one is the greatest? Is it the one about um, keeping the Sabbath holy? Or maybe it's the one about not killing? Or maybe the one about honoring your parents? That's a good one. Which commandment is the greatest? Well, that's the question that some leaders of the church brought to Jesus. And so that is going to be our lesson today in Sunday school. It is going to be from Matthew chapter 22, verse 24 through 30. And it says, when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered and asked a question to test him. And one of them was a lawyer. And he said to him, Teacher, which commandment of the law is the greatest? And Jesus said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And a second is like it, that you shall love your neighbor like yourself. These two commandments, on all of them hang the law and the prophets. So on just two commandments, love God with every part of your being and to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we know in the Ten Commandments, the first four commandments are about God, about loving God and honoring God. Commandments 5 through 10 are how we treat each other, how we honor our parents, how we don't kill each other, how we don't lie, how we don't covet things, and how we love each other. So all of the 10 commandments are summed up in love God and love your neighbor. Now, if you remember from last week, we had a story about images, and the image of Caesar and the image of God. And what was due Caesar is given to Caesar, and what is God is given to God. Jesus said, we are the image of God, and so we need to do what God wants. So, when Jesus is saying to love God with all of your being, he's talking about our relationship with God. And when he's talking about loving your neighbor and loving yourself, he's also talking about loving God because we are the images of God. And our neighbors are the images of God. So it's all the same thing. It's all about love. And that's the important thing. So in a second reading from the first letter to the Thessalonians, Paul says in verse 7 of chapter 2, though we might have made demands as apostles of Christ, but we were gentle among you, like a nurse tenderly caring for her children. So, what does that have to do with anything, you might ask? Well, if we have to love our neighbors, sometimes there are neighbors that we don't really like. There are people who are mean. There are people who are angry. And it's very hard to show love to people who are like that. And Paul says, though we may have made demands as followers of Jesus, we came among you gentle, like a nurse caring for her children. Now, my wife, Nurse Patty, is a pediatric nurse, and she takes care of children. And she treats all of the children with love and care like a good nurse should. But some of the treatments are very, very hard. And sometimes she knows that there's pain associated with treating children to help them get better. Sometimes they give them shots, or they have to open up wounds to clean them out. And sometimes there's a lot of pain, but the medicine that doesn't taste good, the treatment that hurts, is ultimately done with love. And this is the lesson that Paul is saying, is that sometimes loving our neighbor is hard. Sometimes that angry person, sometimes that person who says the mean things, sometimes the person that we consider our enemy because they're just so miserable and full of hate. The treatment that we give them is hard. And sometimes there are hard lessons to learn, but because they too are the image of God, we love them. And we do the hard things that it takes to show love. So, in this world where we are faced with so many challenges and so many hard choices, we need to persist in love and be loving people, and to try and see God in everyone. Because ultimately, there are two commandments: love God, love your neighbor as yourself, because we are images of God. And this is what Jesus is teaching. So, as always, I want you to be well, want you to be safe, and of course, I want you to be a blessing. And we will talk more about these commandments at Fun Day School on Sunday. So, peace.